welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Avril Christensberry. I am the Director of External Relations for the Ullman Foundation. Dialing in here from sunny Baltimore. Excited to talk to you guys about the pros and cons of collaboration and fundraising.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie Norton. I'm just north of Baltimore, and I am a former Ullman employee, and now due to the pandemic, I decided to cut back a little bit on my hours, and so I'm contracting with Ullman on all things communications, and I also operate now a small business by Katie Norton, just to work with small nonprofits on writing and communications efforts. So you can find me at bykatienorton.com. We're so thankful to Robin for inviting us to present today. Thank you, Robin. And really excited to be part of this awesome conference. There's been some great stuff happening today. So we want this to be, just a fun and interactive session. If the group stays relatively small, I think, you can go ahead and raise a hand if you have a question that's timely, and maybe we can address it right at the moment. You're also welcome to enter questions in the Q&A on Whova, and Patty will alert us of those. And we'll keep an eye on the chat here as well. So Avril and I created a brand new event this year called Move Maryland. And it is something that I know and I think I speak for both of us, will remember when we think of the crazy year 2020 and the pandemic as something that we created and are proud of. And it was just an adventure for about half of the year. And so we love to debrief. We love to sort of pick apart our work. And so we've been doing that. And this is a really great opportunity for us to share our learnings with a broader audience. So what we're here to talk about today is lessons learned through a collaborative fundraising event. We all this year have been forced to stretch, pivot, innovate, all these words that we're kind of sick of hearing by now, to approach our fundraising and our philanthropy in new ways as the world around us remains unpredictable. So, many nonprofits have brought their events online. Some have maybe leveraged matching gifts creatively. Many have sought alternate funding sources like the payroll protection loan and things of that nature. One other thing that we did, in addition to all those others, was deciding to collaborate with other nonprofits. Something we never probably would have considered, at least at this level, without being pushed by the global pandemic. And so as conditions continue to be unstable and the economy, fluctuates, as we're unsure of when we'll be able to get back to traditional fundraising events and in-person gatherings, we think it's important to keep this on our radar as an option. And so, we, again, just wanted to share sort of what we've learned and what we believe are the pros and cons to collaborating in fundraising.
Yeah, so what's ahead? We're really going to talk to you about who is Move Maryland and who is the Ullman Foundation behind Move Maryland, why we created it. Obviously, there was a pandemic, but there are a lot of barriers to collaboration and fundraising. We'll also talk about what exactly the event was. So how did we produce it? What went into it? How did nonprofits get involved? And then ultimately, what everyone's probably wondering is, how did it go? Were we able to overcome those barriers and find the benefits in collaboration? And as Katie mentioned, feel free to ask questions throughout. We've got a smaller group, so we can make this conversational. Again, just raise a hand or put a question in the chat. And I think Robin and Patty, I think we've got a poll up there. Is everyone able to see that?
Yes, there are 2 poll questions. And let's see if we can see what they're saying. Okay, what are some clever fundraising ideas you can share since this pandemic and everyone haven't been able to do traditional fundraising?
Robin, I think those are actually the Q&A.
Well, gosh, let's start over. Let's go to the poll. That was a great possible poll. That
would be a good poll, yeah.
Okay. Do you have have you collaborated with other nonprofits on program mission delivery? And we have 100% of the respondents said yes. So you have a wise audience. And let's see what the next poll is. Okay. And this one, do you or have you collaborated with other nonprofits on fundraising? And there, most did not. 67% who responded did not collaborate with other organizations, and 33% said they did. So some diversity there.
Yeah. Well, we were the same way. We've often collaborated on our mission and our programming, but we hadn't very much, certainly not in a substantial way, ever collaborated on fundraising. So that's really what we're going to get into a little bit. And Katie, do you want to talk a little bit about who we are and the Ullman Foundation behind the event?
Great. Yep. Thank you. So the Ullman Foundation is a relatively small nonprofit that focuses specifically on adolescent and young adult cancer patients and survivors. By adolescent and young adult, we mean ages 15 to 39. So this is a group that typically, has a lower rate of diagnosis than other age groups and has much less attention paid to it than children maybe living with cancer, pediatric oncology, or older adults. And those older adults typically have more peers who maybe have already experienced cancer or are going through it at the same time. So the AYA group really kind of is an orphan in the cancer world. And about in 1997, so unbelievably going on 25 years ago, Doug Ullman from Howard County, Maryland, was diagnosed with cancer as a 19-year-old. And he is now a 2-time survivor and a healthy 42-year-old dad. But he and his family felt challenged to find appropriate community for him as a young adult experiencing cancer. And so they took action to create a foundation to provide support specifically to this age group. We provide now, all those years later, a number of services really to meet the psychosocial needs of these young cancer patients. So we're not providing medical care, and we're not really making grants, but we provide anything that, and we don't do research, but anything that kind of falls anywhere else, their needs that they might have. So a few examples: we operate a healthcare hospitality house called Ullman House in Baltimore City, where people can stay for free for the duration of their treatment when they've traveled from out of town to Baltimore to receive cancer treatment. We have several patient navigators who are social workers and clinicians who really walk alongside these young adult cancer patients at the hospital setting and remotely. And so they help them with anything from connecting with other cancer patients in the same age group to understanding their diagnosis, having maybe a better bedside manner than some of the physicians might, talking about things like fertility preservation, or taking a leave of absence from college, things that would be only happening to folks in this age group. We have a number of support groups, many of which are sort of movement-based. So, for example, Cancer to 5K is a nationwide run-walk group where you train for 13 weeks with a group of other young adult cancer survivors and supporters, and then work toward that common goal of achieving a 5K race together. So that's just a small sampling of what we do. We've got about 15 staff members at the moment. That is on the lower end. We have had up to 25 at past times. This year has caused us to need to contract a little bit, but we are proud to still be really delivering the same quantity and quality of services, even with that sort of skeleton crew. We're based in Baltimore, and we really still maintain a very grassroots feel, despite being nearly 25 years old. In a typical year, our budget is about $2.3 million or so. April's sharing a couple shots from our world. We have a lot of fun, we try to make the best of a bad situation and help people still live a really high quality of life and have fun and feel like themselves in the midst of a devastating disease.
Yeah, so we're very much a organization that is dependent on our fundraising in any given year. We're not dependent upon grants. We don't have any earned income. Here's a sort of graph of where our funds come from, and you can see that almost 75% of those are through events and peer-to-peer based programs that are dependent on being in person. Our founder, Doug, when he was diagnosed with cancer, he was an athlete, and we started off building a lot of our programs around sport. We continue to do that today, finding that it's both a great forum for peer-to-peer fundraising and also really brings people together. So we have programs that are for patients and survivors around walking and running a 5K goal race. We also have programs like the 4K for Cancer, which takes college-age young adults and they ride or run their bikes across the country every summer, raising up to $1 million. So at the beginning of the year, like everyone, we thought, oh, this is going to be, a short-term thing. We'll see the light soon. But we ended up having to cancel almost all of our peer-to-peer and in-person events, which was a huge impact to our fundraising. I'm sure many of you face the same thing. So we really had to kind of get creative and think about, where are we going to find these funds from? How can we still engage people and bring people together? And we really looked to one of our events that we had to cancel, Cycle to Inspire, as the foundation for Move Maryland. Cycle to Inspire was an in-person spin-a-thon. We brought in 100 spin bikes and we would bring in individuals and corporate teams. They would adopt a bike and fundraise $1,000 per bike and have this really amazing high energy event, packed full of mission, brought a lot of sponsors in, and we really sort of framed Move Maryland around that concept. Ullman also really has a what if culture that I have always said we kind of operate like a startup with a mission. We've always been encouraged to embrace risk and try new things, and that definitely allowed us to think outside of the box when we were considering how do we replace this lost revenue. So what is Move Maryland? Katie?
Yeah. So I'll just briefly kind of define Move Maryland and share a little bit of what it was about and move into sort of, why and how we created it. So Move Maryland was a virtual day of wellness to move Maryland's nonprofits forward. That was sort of our very quick little tagline to just sum it all up. In reality, it was a lot more than just that. So, it was our way to try and salvage the year, right? To try to keep as many of our programs going as possible to raise as much money as we could. But ultimately, on November 7th, we hosted a live virtual online event that offered 4 different fitness classes that folks could participate in from home. And it was an earned event. So individuals could do peer-to-peer fundraising to earn their way into this November 7th event / after party, incentive, kind of however you want to call it. But that was the goal, to get there. They had to raise $200 each. And we'll dive into a lot more detail. But in essence, it was this November 7th event with a couple months of fundraising preceding it. We created it really specifically to make up the revenue that we were losing from those other peer-to-peer initiatives and in-person events that we couldn't be holding. It started off really, as Averill said, as a way to replace Cycle to Inspire. And so as we started to design an online version of that, we kind of quickly realized, well, if we're already building out this whole platform and way to bring this event virtual, why not invite some other folks? We're taking on these relatively high costs of production, and maybe we could make it worth our while to invite others to join with us. And so it was really a way to turn lemons into lemonade and to just make the best of that situation. As we started brainstorming and saying, what if, we realized there could be some great benefits to collaboration. And so, I want to share a few of those with you. I think we've got a slide for that, Averill. So we thought that this would really be a neat way to got it. There we go. Okay, so we wanted to offer a collaboration that would, cause a little noise and do something different as a way to unite the voices of nonprofits across the state during, this crazy time. We knew that it would allow us to reach a bigger audience, to create some momentum, some buzz, thereby enabling anybody who participated to recruit more participants, to make a stronger case for sponsors, and ultimately to raise more money. We knew it could kind of reduce overhead for us and for others by sharing those expenses. For many small to tiny to medium nonprofits, taking on something like peer-to-peer fundraising, creating a new CRM for that, producing an online event, can be a high cost of startup and doing business that way. And so by pooling these resources, we could allow others to sort of try something that we had gained a lot of experience in and learn at a low risk. And then we also knew that there would be some opportunity to just gain a little extra attention. This was kind of a story. And so we thought that, we would probably reach more media, get a little more coverage, earned media coverage, and that became true. We also knew that there would be some barriers to collaboration. And I think a question in the Q&A addressed this. And so, competition is something that is, I think, a fear of people. Data collection, right, would be a barrier. So who owns data that we collect? How is it shared with collaborators? Financials, who collects the money? How do we divide it? How do we track all of that? Does collecting a whole bunch of extra money affect like our audit and our financials? These are all questions that are on our mind. Marketing and messaging, how do we keep it clear? There would be a big potential for sort of confusion. And finally, fairness was important to us. And so as we designed this event, all of these things were on our mind as potential barriers. And we really tried to put ourselves in the shoes of potential partners and just to bring those barriers down or remove them completely. Okay, so back to the event itself. We wanted to go into exactly a little bit more about what it was to help you understand what goes into pulling off a big initiative like this. Let's see here. So, April, I think, are we at kind of what we provided?
Yeah, so again, we had this awesome 4-hour virtual spin-a-thon, or sorry, not spin-a-thon, but wellness day on the 7th of November. And Ullman really provided everything for the nonprofits on the back end. It was really low risk, and that was kind of our value proposition to the nonprofits. Easy for them to get on board, and it was really free of risk. So what that entailed was Ullman and sort of going behind the guise of the Move Maryland brand, created all of the infrastructure. So we worked with Rallybound, who does our peer-to-peer fundraising, to build out a lot of customizations. We really wanted a leaderboard where you could see both your individuals fundraising, you could see how nonprofits fundraising, and then the total raised from the concept. And that wasn't something that Rallybound had ready to go. So we worked with them to provide that. We also provided all of the customer service, both the nonprofits and individuals. So going back to our long history of peer-to-peer, we have a lot of really great best practices around fundraising in an event like this. So we supported all of the individuals with regular emails, letting them know how they were doing on their fundraising, letting them know what they had to go to be able to participate in the live event on the 7th, which was $200. Everyone had to raise that. And then we also supported the nonprofits. They had any troubles getting their pages set up and getting registered for the event. We supported on the back end as well as regular communications. We also created nonprofit guides and lots of materials that I think our guide is in the handouts that you can see in Whova. And we also provided all the marketing communications. So we built out a website. Let me see if I can switch screens here and I'll show you that. This thing. Just a minute. There we go. Just 1 second. I'll share that with you all. So we built out an entire website. We have a multimedia and graphic designer on our team who's really talented and put this all together. You can see it has both the event details. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping around. The details of the event, the timing of all of the classes. DJ Kopak, who's a viral DJ, was at the event and had all of the music for it and also helped support through his channels and marketing it to his teams and fundraisers. We also had, just the logistics of getting involved and what the steps were, some FAQs, all of our nonprofits. So when someone signed on, they got their logo and link on the website to increase their awareness, steps how to become a partner and how to register your nonprofit. And then also all of our corporate engagement. So links to all of our sponsors, as well as media, strategic partners, and how to join as a company or team. Go back to my slides here. We also supported, I'm just gonna find my slides. We also, beyond building the website, we put out email marketing through MailChimp. We also created standalone emails so that when we were fundraising with, or when we were emailing with an individual who's maybe fundraising for a nonprofit that wasn't the Ullman Foundation, they were confused why they were getting emails from Ullman. They all came from Move Maryland. We also started new social accounts on Instagram and Facebook and maintained those and created content to just create buzz that other nonprofits could also share to inspire their community to sign on and participate. And we also had some paid and earned media as well. So we did some digital marketing through social, and we also supported with internal communications to all the nonprofits as well. Ullman also really facilitated all of the day of logistics. So we contracted all of our vendors. The biggest piece was around production and a portal that we could stream the event from. So we worked with Elite Production Services, who did both the streaming and the portal. So it was a standalone page. It was really important that it be password protected so that someone who hadn't fundraised couldn't have access to the event. And on that portal that everyone logged into on the 7th, there was a chat so people could be communicating with each other. We made sure we had staff that were communicating back with people. We had the live stream. We also had a social wall. So if you used hashtag Move Maryland or tagged Move Maryland throughout the day, it automatically populated onto that page. We had links to our sponsors and links to all of the nonprofits. We also acted as the fiscal agent. That was one of the barriers that Katie mentioned to possible collaboration, was how do you deal with the financials? So we realized that we could process it all through Rallybound, and we could provide reports to all the nonprofits every other week showing all their donor and fundraiser data and all of their contact information as well, which they owned. And then at the end of the event, we processed all of the payouts. So we looked at everything that folks had fundraised and then cut checks back to everyone. Let's see. So how did nonprofits get involved?
You want me to take that one?
Sure.
Okay. So just to give a little idea of sort of the structure overall, the way that it worked was Ullman Foundation really served as kind of the behind the scenes host, creator of the event. And we created the Move Maryland brand to represent the event itself and the initiative so that any partners could just share that brand and not be confusing the message with we're partnering with the Ullman Foundation, but rather we're joining in on Move Maryland. And so they signed up as a nonprofit partner. And, we kind of hemmed and hawed over how many partners do we want to have? How many should we invite? We looked at some models of maybe just having 2 or 3 partners with similar missions or, from our same neighborhood. We toyed with maybe bringing that up to 10 or so, and what would the pros and cons of that be? Ultimately, we decided that we really wanted this to be a very inclusive initiative, especially given just the challenging social environment of this year. We wanted to be all inclusive. We wanted to cover many missions. We didn't want to turn anybody away. And so where we landed was that any nonprofit, a 501c3 in good standing based in the state of Maryland could join as a partner. And so we put out a lot of proactive invitations to nonprofits all the way across the state. We pulled lists of, from different United Way campaigns and things like that to find all these listings of nonprofits. We did a lot of direct outreach, inviting groups to get involved. We also worked with partners like Maryland nonprofits, with fundraising consultants who have big lists of nonprofits to invite that way through other parties. And, and just used other kind of connections that we had. So once a nonprofit staffer heard about it, they could log into a webinar where we would explain the event and the initiative and invite them to get involved. And we realized that just the more nonprofits that get involved, the bigger it could scale, and our fixed costs would stay about the same. There wasn't a ton more work for us, the more nonprofits that got involved. So we just decided to go for it. And, we had big visions. We thought, oh man, we could raise $1 million through this. We didn't quite get there. But, we'll share some results in a little bit. But it was an interesting thing to really look at and dream about, like, where could this go? And we learned a lot for how to improve it in the future. The great thing was that for the nonprofits, there was no risk in getting involved. That was great for them. It ended up being maybe not so great for the event as a whole. We learned because they also didn't have much skin in the game. But for a small nonprofit who just wanted to say, yeah, this looks cool, I'm going to, sign up and see what we can do with it. It was a good opportunity to do that and not be worried about losing a deposit or having to pay a penalty or anything like that, or meet a minimum. So we did ask the partners, hey, try to get 5 participants or so on board. Some did, some didn't, but that was sort of the third level. So there was Ullman as the host, there were the nonprofit partners, and then the bottom of sort of a pyramid would be fundraiser participants. So each nonprofit that signed on then went out and recruited participants from their existing community of support to sign up and register as a nonprofit or as a fundraiser participant. And each of those individuals then had to raise $200 from their community of friends and family to earn their way into that November 7th event. All right.
And for everyone's participation, Ullman collected 25% of what their fundraisers raised. So that was we provided all of the foundation for the entire event. Nonprofits only needed to sign on and encourage their community to join on and support them. And we felt like a 25% sort of cost overall was a pretty fair and reasonable event, or reasonable sort of agreement that we came to. So at the end, after the event, we processed we came up with everyone's totals, and then they received checks for 75% of what their fundraisers raised. We thought that might be a barrier, but we found that was probably the most fair way. And we also thought it might be a barrier to donors, about the 25% sort of payout. But really, I know when it comes to most events, generally your costs are going to be a lot higher than 25%. So the nonprofits, they really saw that as a good deal. And we really didn't receive any sort of pushback on that 25%. Most people thought that it was very fair for what we provided. And sort of it kept their costs a lot lower. Again, they didn't have the overhead of putting the event on, and also didn't have to put in a lot of staff time into it, aside from just pushing out to their communities.
Great. So how did it go? Again, we kind of knew that it had great potential, but it was a weird year. So it was hard to predict exactly what it would be. So I think we're going to share. Do you want to kick off with the video, April?
All right.
This is a recap video that we produced from the actual day of the event, that we, allowed partners to use afterwards, and that we'll use in the future should we decide to replicate it.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to Move Maryland.
An exceptional spirit of service and generosity is what truly sets Marylanders apart.
Move Maryland, that way that we have a path forward to continue to make sure that the resources are in our neighborhood.
L2, take it up, let's go, pick it up the pace, yes.
I see y'all moving out there.
Need this body weight. Yeah, canned goods. I'm sure you have some canned goods at home right now.
You are showing us right now that if we work together, we can make a difference in our community.
Good. You're down in that squat. Strong arm.
I've seen the good work you do firsthand, and it's more important than ever.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
I just wanted to thank everyone for your work fundraising with this initiative.
We did it together.
It seems like so long ago. So what you just saw there was really a great taste of the event, right? You saw some of the marketing, the logo, the stuff that we were using to promote it beforehand in social, and through email and things like that. You saw actually what the participants experienced on November 7th through their computer screens at home. So they watched those instructors teaching live. They took part in Tai Bo, in a bar class, in a cardio class, and in a family boot camp. And then you saw several, notable politicians and athletes speak in between. We had, between the fitness sessions, these messages, inspirational messages from those types of folks. We also had live on-site interviews, socially distanced properly, with some of the top nonprofit partners, a staff member and a client. And so that was a really cool way to bring, a select group of missions from the 80 nonprofits that were represented and gain each of them some more exposure with the folks that were watching from home. So ultimately, we had 81 nonprofits registered. That includes the Ullman Foundation as sort of a partner. And we were floored by that level of participation. I think, we had started out thinking we'll get a couple of partners, or maybe we'll get 10, maybe 20 or 25 if we really, beat the drum hard. We ended up getting to 81, which was incredible. And that really surpassed our expectations. It took a lot of work to get there, but it was fun. It really allowed us to network, to get to know a lot of new people, just to feel like we're in community together. Everybody's struggling through this. We can empathize a little bit. So those 81 nonprofits then went out to their communities. They recruited individuals like me and you, who already maybe supported them, who follow them, maybe had been clients. In some cases, they're alumni, patients, whatever the case for their particular nonprofit. And they said, hey, we've signed up for this Move Maryland. We're part of the movement. Would you join us and raise money for our mission? Maybe it was a pet shelter. We know you adopted your dog. We hope that was a meaningful experience for you. Now come out and raise $200 for us. And you can take part in this fun event on November 7th once you meet your goal. If it was a children's hospital, they reach out to their list of donors. Your child had their life saved here. That's awesome. We hope that you'll choose to give back in this funny year and raise $200 to support our mission, right? So this is the type of outreach that groups were doing. They were doing it on social, through email, et cetera. So we ended up with, yes.
Katie, there's a question that might relate to what you're talking about right now from Elizabeth Farrar. She's saying, what strategies help prevent sheep stealing, I love that phrase, of donors when you are collaborating in fundraising?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. So, that's something that we, I think we talked about early on. And really the way that we kind of think through this at Ullman is that fundraising is not a zero-sum game. Just because a donor gives to one organization doesn't mean that they can't give to others as well. I think what we've seen this year, at least from our observations, are that people who have resources are still giving and giving more. And so, I think we just approached it with an attitude of welcoming instead of fear and scarcity, and thought, people already have multiple nonprofits that they support. That's awesome. And the onus is on us to represent ourselves well, to stay in their inbox, to stay on their social feed, right? To share compelling stories, to inspire them, to stay personally connected with them. And, if we're putting out 80 other nonprofits in front of them, that will hopefully help raise those nonprofits up. And we hope that they'll still stay connected with us because we've already done a really good job stewarding them, cultivating them, building a personal relationship with them. So we personally weren't really afraid of that. We knew that Maryland has lots of people, and there were a few individuals who chose to fundraise for multiple organizations, and they could do that, and that was awesome. But they had to raise $200 for each of those. So I hope that answers that question. If you have a follow-up to that, feel free to chime in.
And I think too, one of the reasons that we thought Move Maryland would work was because we saw everyone going about their own virtual events on their own. So we really hope that this would reduce the noise and maybe help with keep us from competing against each other as much. There's always a chance someone's going to fundraise for another organization. Like Katie said, that doesn't mean that they're not going to support you in another way. And we hope that this would reduce competition in the sort of the market.
So those 81 nonprofits, so how I talked about earlier, where, there was really no risk to them getting involved, we saw that play out here. So of the 81 who actually registered and sent us their certificate of good standing and the whole bit, only 55 actually recruited participants and fundraised. So that was a big learning opportunity for us, is that they probably need to have a little bit of skin in the game for us to, for them to follow through, and for us to feel like that wasn't wasted effort for those few minutes that we spent uploading their logo and really giving them free publicity. So out of 55 nonprofits that did end up recruiting individuals, a total of 393 individual participants were recruited and registered. And of those 393, same thing. So they didn't really have any risk to not doing it. They didn't have to put down a deposit. They didn't sign a credit card agreement ahead of time, like we do with some other peer-to-peer events. They just had to say, yeah, count me in. And so of the 393, 303 actually fundraised and met their $200 minimum. So total raised was $127,362. And the average per fundraiser was about the average per nonprofit, was about $1,792. There were a couple nonprofits that skewed that in one direction or the other. So the highest raising nonprofit was the Ullman Foundation, which, shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, we created this, we kind of knew what we were doing. We had a head start. So we raised about $25,000. Okay. April, can you take over for a second? I have a bloody lip here.
Yeah, so we raised about $25,000, and our second highest nonprofit raised about $9,000. So again, that average amongst all the nonprofits who actively recruited was $1,792. So all in all, through peer-to-peer fundraising, we raised about $100,000, and that extra $27,000 came from sponsorship. Sponsorship was one of the questions we had at the beginning. How do we do this fairly? How do we make sure that if someone's recruiting a sponsor, they're adequately getting the funds from that? And what we realized at the end of the day was to keep it simple. And Ullman solely solicited sponsorship and kept all of the sponsorship. And we really used that to underwrite the event costs. And that way there just wasn't any conflict. I'm sure we have connections at M&T, probably another 30 nonprofits have connections at M&T Bank too. And so this really, would get really tricky in trying to divide that up and really decide who had solicited that sponsorship. So this just kind of kept that sort of potential conflict out of the equation. On the expenses side, you can see that we grossed around $70,000. So that came to $25,000 that we raised from our fundraisers. We got another $27,000 from sponsorship. And the difference of that was the 25% that our other nonprofits raised. So we grossed $70,000. We ended up netting around $40,000. So the $30,000 in hard costs came primarily from production, of building out that custom portal, having a team on site, day of running the AV. We had multiple cameras going, switching back and forth between DJ Kopak, the instructors, and there was a lot of tech involved in sort of switching from live shots over to sponsor videos to nonprofit highlights and everything that went into that. So overall, I mean, that's somewhat low expenses, which is great. We would have loved to have seen that net skewed by a higher revenue, but we'll come back to that in sort of our higher level sort of outcomes and thoughts. But there were a lot of indirect costs that went into it that will influence kind of our takeaways as well too. A lot of time went into this. Katie and I probably put 50 to 75% of our time into this over several months. We had several coworkers working on it as well, helping support peer-to-peer fundraising. We also had our multimedia graphic designer doing a lot of footage to help promote the event ahead of time, and those videos that were played throughout. Also, the social account management, the customer service, all of that really added up in sort of those indirect costs as well. So again, at the end of the day, we ended up netting about $40,000, and then we also had accounting who was helping with those payouts and processing checks and everything afterwards. So at the end of the day, was it worth it? What do you think, Katie?
Yeah, just to go back, I saw Elizabeth asked another question about sort of what was the average actual then payout for the nonprofits. So they got to keep 75% of everything they raised. So just to make the math easier, we'll round up the average to say they raised $2,000. They would take away $1,500 of that back for going on their books. They also received, the full list of the names of donors who contributed to that $2,000 raised, a full list of names and contact information for the participants who fundraised that money. And so they could continue then to cultivate and thank and steward those donors and the participants who participated in support of their mission. It really was what you put into it was what you got out of it, which is true of anything in life, right? So
nonprofits were featured more often. We filmed independent videos with them and clients that they're able to repurpose in their own marketing. So there were indirect benefits too. If you were willing to put the time into it and raise more money, then you were going to get some other benefits on top of the check that you got at the end of the day.
Yeah. So was it worth it? Yeah. It really, even when you do the math and you look at, the dollars that we net and then the indirect costs, the time that went into it, we didn't make a ton off it. There was certainly opportunity costs that we might have missed out on, but overall, we're glad we did it. We feel like it was worth it for this year. It was really very much a feel-good initiative, right? When we all needed one. It was kind of in that 6 months after the pandemic started, when everybody was having such fatigue and just needed something positive to focus on. We loved this message of let's all move Maryland forward together. Everyone's included, everyone's invited. Let's do something positive, right? And so that felt good to kind of be the hosts of that and to create that. We got some great media attention, some really good buzz. We were able to deepen our relationship with Governor and Mrs. Hogan, with several of our county executives and elected officials. We got some awesome press. We were featured in the Chronicle of Philanthropy. We were in The Sun. I did a spot on WBAL. We had a few other smaller articles, but that was a big win. And we got great feedback. We did a survey post-event that April coordinated. And, really across the board, participants were very grateful and said, we were so glad to have had a chance to try peer-to-peer. This was a good chance to let our board see what it might be like to fundraise, or we really learned a lot, We built some great relationships with other nonprofits across the state. That was a really cool takeaway. And, the brand that we created, that was a great exercise in sort of creating a brand. We learned a lot and we felt it was really strong, that we could use it again, whether it's in the exact same way or a different iteration of it. We think it's lasting. And then really for Ullman, it allowed us to kind of, first, get an idea that we had a good existing reputation, that people trusted us to go into this sort of unknown with us. And we were able to establish ourselves a little bit as innovators and leaders, as a group that's willing to take the risk and go out on a limb, sort of for the greater good. So we really did feel like it was worth it, even despite, some challenges. And I think those are pretty clear. It didn't make as much as we had hoped. We had a big vision. We didn't quite get there. It was the first year in a year of total unknown. So we're not being too hard on ourselves, but certainly we would have loved to see that number be higher. It took a lot of time, and that's that's where I really get hung up, is like, what was the opportunity cost of maybe what we missed out on by April and I and a few of our colleagues putting a good chunk of our time towards this? What could we have been doing otherwise? Maybe cultivating individual donors more, just spending more time on the phone, thanking our donors, whatever it might have been. That's a question. It was hard to kind of create clear communication around everything. It was a new concept. This isn't something that's done a lot. And so we spent a lot of time kind of figuring that out and kind of learning along the way. And, I think the timing around the election made it difficult, just because there was so much noise and excitement and, just change happening there. It took away from an email in the mailbox from Move Maryland, right? When people were focused on that. It also just, Baltimore City kind of put some restrictions or warnings out about events that could take place, potentially gatherings, public gatherings around the election. And so we did make a game day decision or a couple days pregame, to move from Baltimore Soundstage, where we had initially planned to have the event, to the studio of the production company that we used. Turned out being fine, but it was just a change. So those were really our specific learnings. Then I'm going to hand it off to April to talk about kind of overall pros and cons that we think are more applicable should you be considering collaborating in some way on fundraising.
Yeah, I definitely, just back on the election coverage, I definitely think that was a distraction. Nobody was thinking, there was so much uncertainty even after the 4th. We hadn't considered that an election wouldn't be declared for days after. And I think people were, trying to support their candidate too and fundraising. So it was a competition there as well. And even day of, the election was actually finally declared at about 11 o'clock, right in the middle of our live event. So yeah, we saw some drop off in participants that day during to see the coverage. So, but yeah, objectively, when you look back on, an event that brings in different nonprofits and they're collaborating on fundraising, we definitely thought that there were a lot of pros. We think that we got a lot more media attention. We had coverage. Katie was in a live interview with WBAL, Baltimore Sun. We had an article on Technically, we had an article on The Patch. So we got some good coverage from it. And again, there was just a cool concept. People hadn't seen this, so there was coverage around it and bringing together all these nonprofits. And through the speakers we had involved too, you saw all those politicians. They sort of, I don't know that we'd have gotten all of those had it been Olin going at it on our own. Certainly we got some sponsorship support out of it too, and we're able to get that $27,000 because it was supporting an entire event for all of these nonprofits. Little sister, I can't W something someone. I can't see the rest of your name has a question, so feel free to chime in with that.
Eddie, can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, my name is Zena White. I have my sister joining me through my iPad because she wasn't able to connect. Okay. So that's why my face is not on the screen. So she has a question that I'm not able to put in the mute. So I'm bringing her closer. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, how is your initiative different than the Maryland Charitable initiative that goes, that's an annual initiative for Maryland state employees to contribute to nonprofits?
It's entirely separate. Mm-hmm. Yep, it has nothing to do with that. This is just a standalone event and fundraiser. Again, facilitated by the Ullman Foundation under the Move Maryland brand for any Maryland nonprofit in good standing with a 501c3. So it was entirely separate.
She answered the question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We did, though. That was one of the lists that we used to build our outreach list, to invite nonprofits to participate, because that is such an exhaustive list of nonprofits. It helped us really determine who we should reach out to.
Two other questions. One is the Move Maryland event was specifically built for a virtual environment, so it was quite unique. But April Kruth is asking, what are some other clever fundraising ideas that organizations can consider in the midst of, these social distancing requirements?
Yeah. Maybe, do you mind if we come back to that in just a minute? And we'll touch on some other stuff throughout this. Yeah, we'll come back to your question for sure.
And the other question is, would you do it again?
Well, let me keep going with our objective pros and cons, and we'll get to our future plans for Move Maryland.
Very good.
But yeah, some of the sort of other objective cons that we saw were the pros that we had was just the better ROI that you could offer through an event by bringing people together. You cut down on your event costs by spreading it across many nonprofits. And we also thought that it really helped build relationships with other nonprofits. And, we've continued to maintain conversations. A lot of people have expressed interest. One of the surprises, I think, was how happy people were to sign on with that 75-25 split. That wasn't a barrier at all. But I think some of the cons we saw were maybe that the event, there was maybe a little bit of sort of virtual burnout. And so we think that maybe the Move Maryland, has potential, but could use some tweaking. There's also a huge opportunity confusion. We think especially, it was the first time we ever did it, and it was a new kind of event, but it definitely took a lot of education about what that 4-hour virtual day was and what people were signing on for, both among the nonprofits and the individuals. And certainly Katie mentioned, we had 81 nonprofits sign on, but only 55 recruited anyone. So definitely having people get some skin in the game, nonprofits have some skin in the game, was a challenge, and getting people to buy into it. Touching back like a little bit a while ago, some of the more indirect benefits I think people got, and probably part of that 55 to 81 ratio was that some people really don't have any experience with peer-to-peer fundraising, and this was an opportunity for them to see our best practices and sort of learn from what we're doing, again, without any risks. So what's next? Right now we're regrouping. We're getting together some nonprofits, some folks we know well, to pull together a roundtable and really sort of reflect on the event. Again, we got great feedback. Everyone loved the concept, and people love the idea of collaborating and going at this together. It only elevates everyone involved. But again, maybe there was some virtual burnout. This just wasn't the thing that Move Maryland should be. So we felt our brand is really strong. People wanted gear, they wanted swag. And, certainly once the pandemic is gone, hopefully sooner rather than later, that opens up what we can do as Move Maryland. We're also looking into registering as a standalone 501c3. We haven't made that decision, but we're looking into it and wonder if that will just ease any of the complications that go into this kind of event. So we're really just kind of regrouping, figuring out what's next, what makes sense for all of us. We'll probably reevaluate sort of the structure of inviting nonprofits to be involved. Maybe there is a minimum that everyone has to have to participate. Maybe we narrow down the focus a little bit. But yeah, we're really just kind of trying to figure it out and just see what's next for Move Maryland. We do think that there is something next for it, though.
If you're interested in kind of staying in tune with what we decide, I'd recommend definitely reaching out to April. She'll be in charge this year, and we'll be happy to keep you posted. So I'll field that one question now about other creative ideas. This was our big one. We spent a lot of time here. Another thing that we did really early on in the pandemic was, I will say, the result of a dedicated relationship building strategy too. And so while it seems super creative, it also harkens back to just the importance of ongoing investment in cultivation and building relationships. So DJ Kopech, who you saw featured in the event, is just a great DJ who does all kinds of corporate and sporting events and weddings and stuff. And he had attended several Ullman galas and events in the past, just been kind of a typical supporter, annual donor, but somebody who we just did a good job keeping in touch with through our newsletter, through our social media, et cetera. And so he had started on some sort of, he went viral streaming from his basement, playing DJ music, early on in the pandemic, in that week of real quarantine. And so he kind of was challenged to do it for a purpose. And so we were one of the first groups that he reached out to offer to do another collaborative sort of fundraising event. And so we did a live stream we had him live stream on Facebook, and his audience was huge. He had tens of thousands of eyes on his stream. And those folks were invited to give directly to the Ullman Foundation. We did some work, of course, beforehand too. We raised a match, and we got some commitments before from some of our donors. And so we ended up raising $107,000 just in that one evening. Again, it was creative. Like, we did a good job, building on the opportunity. It was also, though, the result of long-term relationship building and good stewardship. And so for me, I think I would say creativity certainly has its place. And one of the takeaways from this experience is it can also be draining, right? It can take a lot of your time. It can take a lot of expenses, expected or unexpected. And really what we are learning at Ullman and how we're approaching this coming year is like doubling down on best practices that are tried and true. And so really just identifying who is our base, what people do we depend on, making sure that we are stewarding those relationships just the best that we possibly can, letting them know that they're needed and that they're appreciated, and asking them, just outright asking them, and making sure that we don't forget to do that. So I'm happy to open it up if others have creative ideas that they've seen or would like to share too.
Yeah, I think just sharing our impact, Ullman House, one of our services, we were able to stay open throughout the pandemic and not close at all. That was really like for us to be able to tell that story and share that with our donors, and also to just make those direct asks and share the need was really helpful. And it's also kind of been helpful for us that our mission is connected to the pandemic. Cancer patients are especially vulnerable to COVID. And so we've been able to talk about that and sort of stay relevant with when people's attention was going elsewhere. We'd love to hear if anybody else has any clever fundraising ideas. We could use them too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
If everybody would like to unmute and put their videos on, have a little chatter here at the end together.
Happy to take any more questions or comments. And please forgive my interruption. I told my children they could only interrupt me if there was blood, and there was.
So well behaved.
It wasn't too bad.
Patty, your organization is relatively new. You established Pure Play Every Day about 3 years ago. Have you moved out on fundraising initiatives, events, or solicitation of sponsors, anything?
No, honestly, Pure Play Every Day truly does focus on mission-based activities. We honestly don't have very much fundraising going on at all. Most of the revenue that we've generated has come through sponsorship of mission-driven activities. So it's fee for service or sponsors actually participating in our events. So
excellent. But that's that relationship building that Avril and Katie are talking about. I know Elizabeth is very familiar with relationship building. And Nancy and Lee, if you wanted to talk a little bit about some of your fundraising initiatives or questions you might have, and little sister, who's I'm forgetting the name, but if you'd like to come back on too.
Yeah, I can share. This is Lee. I'm with the Charleston County Public Library. Can everybody hear me? I'm on my phone.
Yes.
So okay. I joined as a development manager last year, and there really wasn't much fundraising going on. So we're still very early on in our fundraising plan, development plan. But one thing we did this fall after Giving Tuesday, we did an end of year campaign. And some people probably heard this before, but it was a very small campaign, but it was successful. We did a wish board where it had 50 spaces, $1, $2, $3, all the way up to 50. And once each square was filled, it was removed. And then it was just a quick way. Within a few weeks, we raised almost $1,500 just from very small incremental donations, which the main purpose of that was to just get new first-time donors that we can cultivate. So it was successful, creative, something new we did and hadn't done before, but on a smaller scale, but long-term, the benefits hopefully will pay off as we grow those donors.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. It's all about getting those names and contact information, right? And then just letting them know what their impact is.
And Nancy, would you like to share about your organization? And Nancy has left the building. So any other questions? If not, I wanted to thank everybody for jumping on for this last of the day session and remind you that we do seek your feedback. Everything training-wise that Nonprofit Institute does, we want your evaluation. So if you go under the survey section on the left-hand side of your Whova, I keep saying Whova, the main navigation bar, you'll see surveys, and under that you'll see a survey for the entire conference and then one for this session. If you would fill them out, and of course we'll be asking for your suggestions for future breakout sessions and the like. But I want to thank Katie and Avril so much for sharing the afternoon with us, and also for your courageous nature to say, let's try something totally new in the midst of a worldwide pandemic. I mean, talk about, being resilient. That sure shows it all. So thank you very much for participating. Everybody stay healthy and safe, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next year, and hopefully
Robin and Patty
in
for
person.
help facilitating.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.